All right, we are finally back with Thomas Myrtle. And Thomas, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing quite well. Thanks for having me on again.
Oh no, it's no problem. Thank you for coming on. Actually, ever since we did episode one, for a channel my size thus far, I think last time I looked, it was like 300 and something subscribers. Anytime you come on my channel, we outpace that number drastically. I want to say the last time you was on, we had 850 views on that video, and since then, people have kept commenting and messaging me. When is Thomas coming back on? When are y'all doing episode 2? I mean, it's just nonstop, and I keep telling them the same thing. I'm like, look, believe me, he stays very busy. I stay very busy, but I'm gonna get him on as soon as possible. So
Well, that's excellent, and I'm glad that people are really interested in hearing a lot of this information because this case has so many layers to it, as you know, and it is related to so many other instances. I think of kind of really mayhem, murder, kind of very mysterious type activity that has occurred in this county, in the surrounding area, and really in the state of Wisconsin for quite some time, for generations, I would say. There have been really violent and mysterious incidents that have occurred in this entire state, and I think that when people see the bizarre events that take place here and see how far the bounds of coincidence, how far those bounds of coincidence can be stretched, it really, I think people are, they sense that there's something deeper here, that we're kind of looking at, that there's something deeper.
right, and I've mentioned before that different states and counties, everybody has their things, but I would say more so than most, Wisconsin, and some of the things that me and you've talked about, and other people have talked about with me. I I would say, as far as the coincidence and just the strange nature of some of these things, and to me, the obvious corruption that's so out in the open, maybe that's what makes a lot of this intriguing and makes it stand out.
That is one element of it, and the way that this corruption is sustained and perpetuated through generations of intermarriage, through membership in the same fraternities, the Eagles Club, the Knights of Columbus, there are various lodges that operate in Manitowoc and Calumet, and this certainly isn't to attack or kind of accuse everybody who belongs to those types of organizations, but they do function as a very efficient means of forming an old boys network, forming a kind of unofficial, unaccountable kind of dimension to a society where you have the sheriff and the judges and the lawyers and the various people involved at various different offices and levels of this system. You have them all meeting behind closed doors and putting on robes and doing their little ceremonies, and they have their own little language and their own little secret handshakes, and this is the world that they've kind of existed in and been raised in for since their childhood. Many of them have fathers and grandfathers and uncles that are in these same organizations, and then they just come up and they've already been preconditioned to a certain way of doing things. And I think that the corruption and the cronyism kind of just is a self repeating cycle.
Right. And when you have no repercussions and you have no accountability to the things that you're doing, whether it be, district attorneys and all these lawyers and cops, and, I mean, in every county and state and all this, you have, they all know each other, and even politicians behind closed doors, when they're in front of camera, they're the enemy. Behind closed doors, they're out shaking hands and they're talking to each other and all this stuff. But when you have corruption running rampant and there's no accountability, there's no repercussions. I mean, they just have full sole power, and the power gets handed down from generation to generation, it seems like. But we have Rubber Ducky that is watching this video, and
Nice.
she is a heavy hitter. And
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Making a Murderer YouTube community. So that's pretty cool. But look, believe it or not, I was on Facebook today and in the past, recent past, and Rubber Ducky and others, for some reason here lately, have been talking more about Carmen Boutwell, and she's going to be one of the topics that we're going to cover today. So I guess we'll start with her. But I found it odd that there was people asking in comment sections through various videos and through different groups in Facebook, who is Carmen Boutwell? And that kind of shocked me because, you know, like I said many times, I watched Making a Murderer 3-4 times, and it was 2-3 years ago when I first started watching it. But far as diving into the information, you know, she's a name that I've only recently heard. So for me to see all these people saying that they don't know who she is, I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to join with a lot of other people that are talking about it and inform people what suspicions surround Carmen Boutwell.
Well, I've often seen her death referred to as drug-related. You know, that's very often what you see, that they say that it was some type of an overdose. I don't know how entirely clear that is, or if it was in fact drug-related, how much we know about exactly what she had ingested and exactly what the circumstances of that were. You know,
I think it was well.
That's often said, but you know, when I see the actual
Yeah.
article that was in the Herald Times, they actually say that it was inconclusive. So did they actually ever prove
Right.
that it was?
So, and that's what I wanted to add in real quick. Now, when we refer to an article, we have to assume that or source or information, we have to assume that that information is correct. And like you just said, I probably read the same article you did. At first it was inconclusive, and then I read another article where they said it was a methadone overdose. And I believe I also read the coroner for Manitowoc County. I want to say I've read so many different reports and stuff today that it's all running together in my mind. But I want to say that the autopsy originally was inconclusive. Maybe that has something to do with they had to send the toxicology off to, you know, or something like that.
Yeah, that is entirely plausible. That perhaps there was, you know, that they hadn't yet determined exactly what type of drugs were in play here. You know, and of course, yeah, I have often heard it referred to as drug related and related to methadone. But I also heard from an individual who said that they had some contact with Carmen's grandmother and other members of her family, had said that they did not believe that it was drug related. This individual is saying this individual who says that they spoke to members of her family, and they instead said that there were indications that it might have been strangulation. So, like so many other things in Manitowoc County, you have you know, just shrouded in contradiction and shrouded in you know.
Rubber Ducky just comment. Can you see the comments, Thomas?
Oh yeah, I can
Okay.
I can see it. Yeah.
She said that her autopsy had a toxicology report attached, so that's something I didn't know. So that would be interesting in the sense that if the toxicology report was attached to the autopsy report, it seemed like it wouldn't have been inconclusive. So that's interesting. And Rubber Ducky is also saying that she had marks on her neck, and
Yeah.
it was methadone and ethanol in her toxicology. So
Very interesting.
when it comes down to, okay, it's like I've seen people question on Facebook today, how does this, what if anything does this have to do with the case of Stephen Avery? And the picture, I'm sure you've seen it, the picture that Beyond Avery Road was referring to just now. He said he knows who created it. It's the glasses on Teresa Halbach are photoshopped on, but it just, the photos created to show just how similar these two women look to each other. And elaborate on how these, you know, how Carmen Boutwell ties into potentially Teresa Halbach's case.
Well, it would mainly be the timing is November 3rd, 2005, when she was found dead in the morning in her apartment in Manitowoc. And of course, that was the very same day that Teresa Halbach was reported missing. And in fact, if you listen to some of the audio of the sheriff's office, you see that they were initially actually confused as to whether it was Carmen or Teresa. They thought that the discovery of Carmen's body might have actually been linked with the missing persons case that they were working on. So, the timing immediately presents a kind of a very interesting coincidence here. And then, of course, there are allegations that the sheriff's office took control of the remains, and that they kind of handled all of the arrangements for the funeral. And in light of that, it's interesting to note, certainly, that there were several individuals involved in the investigation as detectives who had family with connections to funeral homes. Of course, the famous example is Lieutenant Mike Bushman, who was a key figure in this cover-up, who was a key figure in the 85 cover-up, because he was somebody who was investigating a rape that was linked to Gregory Allen. And he knew that at the time when he arrested Avery in 85. Mike Bushman was one of Avery's arresting officers. And of course, he was also a key figure in the Ricky Hochstetler cover-up. Now, Mike Bushman, he married a woman named Ann Pfeffer, Pfeffer. And Ann Pfeffer came from the family of Leonard C. Pfeffer and the other Pfeffers, who own a very large chain of funeral homes, all of which offer cremation services. And then, of course, one of the two officers who first discovered Teresa's remains in Avery's property, Kelly Sipple, one of these officers who discovered these remains, they say, but didn't photograph or videotape them. Kelly Sipple is believed to be related to the Sipple family in New Holstein, who operate funeral homes both there and in Fond du Lac County, where Teresa visited that morning, or that early in the afternoon, 1 o'clock, 1:30ish, but where she went to see Stephen Schmitz. So you have at least two officers in the involved in finding the remains. Mike Bushman, who of course led the team that found pieces of the cell phone in one of the burn barrels. And then you have Kelly Sipple, who was one of the two officers, along with Jost, who reportedly first located the remains in Avery's property. And both of these individuals had families with connections to funeral homes, and in both cases, these funeral homes offered cremation services. So that has definitely led to the speculation that perhaps the body was taken to one of these funeral homes, and that could have been cut up, cremated, and then possibly used as a prop in this larger operation.
Right. And that's the thing. A lot of people that lean towards, and I'm not saying I lean either way. I don't want to make any assumptions or anything like that at this point. I just love diving into this. But a lot of people that believe Teresa Halbach is still alive, or that wasn't her remains that was on the property, really attached to this Carmen Boutwell story, because she dies like a couple of days after. Well, actually, she dies on the same day that Teresa Halbach is officially reported missing.
Yes.
And then now her funeral service was held on November the 8th. And the bones, among many other items of evidence, was found on November the 8th. And I have read articles where they said that people have looked into this and they said, oh, no, it couldn't be because of some certain timeline. But then they referred to, well, it couldn't be because the service was held on the 8th, and that's when the bones was found. Well, that's not accurate, because you could still have a service. And you can still have, because if she was cremated, you can still have ashes in the can for your service, but that don't mean that those ashes are her bones.
Right.
And it's speculated and talked about a lot that some bones are believed to be stolen, and that's where these bones come into play, especially when you found so few in the Avery burn pit.
Right. You only had, two that were said to be rather large that Jost and Sipple had located, and yet I don't know. I have not seen any photos or videos or any type of evidence that those two even existed. They're talking about these large bones, the two large bones that were found, and yet there doesn't appear in any of the photos of the crime scene, doesn't appear to be any evidence of that. The only thing that I've seen even referred to as a bone is something that was so small that it was held between the investigator's fingers. And Carmen Boutwell, as far as Carmen Boutwell's link to the Halbach case, I see that Chad Keller, I believe, pointed out that Carmen was pulled out of the house. She was removed from her Manitowoc apartment at 1 p.m. And then a few hours later, that is when Karen Halbach, who was Teresa's mother, actually makes the call to Calumet County to report her daughter missing. That is all the timing around this whole thing, around Carmen's death, as it parallels kind of Teresa's disappearance. The timing is just weird, and I don't know whether, in fact, there is a link as far as using the remains as a prop in the operation. I mean, I've seen that, definitely. That's been a persistent rumor. Maybe the others could help me out here, but I had always thought that, the official identification had been made via the mother or a relative of the mother, whereas I understand that Carmen is said to have only been related distantly through the father. So if that's the case, if that's true, then I don't know how a link could be established, but certainly they were, as you mentioned, very similar in both age and appearance. I believe they were only, Teresa was only 1 year older than Carmen.
Right. Rubber Ducky says it was an open casket in front of her family on November the 8th, and her family saw her loaded into the hearse at 1:30 p.m. And what time were the bones found? That's something I should have made a note of, but obviously probably before 1:30. I'm not sure, but that'll be something I have to look into. But
yeah, from my perspective, the death of Carmen is kind of really deserves examination, whether or not, in fact, her remains were planted there. It remains this giant question mark. We've heard various different contradictory things from people who say that they've spoken to Carmen's family about, what her relationship to drugs was, whether she was, in fact, I've heard that she was gay, which of course would raise a lot of questions as to who this Gary Cree guy was, this guy who was Manitowoc County ordered to stay away from her a couple of weeks before her death. I think about on October 13th, and it leaves a lot of that open.
Yeah. Rubber Ducky says, however, that doesn't mean much because the anthropologist didn't see the bones till November 10th. So that's another interesting. But I mean, that's the whole point of this. It's not that we're on here saying one thing or another. What we're doing is we're exhausting, and we're talking about, when a person asks who is Carmen Boutwell and why is she in this conversation, that's why we bring it up and talk about it, is to, basically give all accounts of all, what all people have said and theories and stuff like that. And also, Linda said it's debunked and it's false that Carmen Boutwell and Teresa Halbach are not related.
No, she's right that there was somebody who interviewed the brother, and that the brother said that really that her death had no connection to this case, at least insofar as they were not relatives, certainly not by blood, is what this guy said, and that her remains were not used in the operation in this way, which from my perspective, I'm just giving a rundown of
exactly
what the rumor is, how she got involved in this investigation to begin with. She was a big issue, on Reddit, going forward after the, she was, a lot of people were talking about this. It's kind of fallen by the wayside now because, of course, Zellner's investigation hasn't gone in that direction. But as far as Carmen Boutwell's death, I do think it deserves a lot of investigation because it remains a sudden death of an individual, who, we really don't know all that much about. The timing is just, and I mean,
that's what I was gonna say. As far as our series is concerned, Mysteries of Manitowoc, you know, regardless if it has any ties to Stephen Avery, it's still an interesting topic to talk about. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, certainly, and I definitely think that there's also been a lot of a lot of misinformation has probably gone around about it. That's why it's one of those things where you almost get to a point where you can't be sure of anything that you hear about her, because every time you follow one claim, you find an opposite claim or an opposing claim. So it's just one of those things where it's we really need more documents. We need more reliable information from people who knew. But as far as Carmen's the investigation, how that was handled, the Detective Dave Remacher was assigned to the case, and of course Detective Remacher was very much involved in the Ricky Hochstetler cover-up, as well as the investigation, the Hallback case. And so Dave Remacher appears on the scene, and one of the first things that he says is that finding the guilty party would be, and I'm paraphrasing, finding the guilty party would be like finding a needle in a haystack.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
at the very outset, David Remacher is saying that this case will not be solved. Just like very, very similar to what they were saying about the Ricky case, by the way, that they're just closing the books on it before it even really gets out there.
Yeah, and I want to let people know too, people that's watching or will watch, that we're not done with the Ricky case. We have a bunch more information that we're going to talk about. It's just that we don't want to, do consecutive videos on the same material. We'll always come back to that with and I know you was telling me that you haven't even scratched the surface on that case.
Oh yeah, that's it's a good case in the sense that one thing that's missing from this Carmen case is that there's a lot of there's an absence of documentary evidence, really. I mean, we have to go on a lot of what we have to go on are people who say that they've spoken to the family, rumors, little bits and pieces like the court record evidence, which shows, kind of what I thought to be very suspicious, this contact with the judicial system prior to her death and the weeks before. She's arrested. She contests the arrest, asks for a preliminary hearing, and then a review of the hearing is set for November 3rd, the date that she ends up dead. It's just it's interesting that when you look at when somebody dies suddenly, mysteriously, you look at who was in that person's life immediately before they ended up dead, and in this case, among those people would certainly be law enforcement and the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office were very much involved with her life prior to her death.
Yeah, and a case we talked about, me and you earlier, I thought it was kind of interesting, and it's not necessarily in Manitowoc, it's Milwaukee, but Wisconsin in general. We was talking about the Vernon Seitz case.
Yes, that's a creepy one.
Yeah, exactly. I thought it was interesting. I think we ought to talk a little bit about it just to have some fun with it. I think you'd be better suited to start off with this. I have information right here in front of me, but instead of just reading it or sounding rehearsed, won't you take over this a little bit?
All right, I can do that. It really is. It's kind of like put on your Halloween hats. I don't know. It's like this guy was found dead in his home. The police had actually wanted to talk to him about allegations that he had made to his therapist. I'll explain those in a little bit. But when the police get to Vernon Seitz's home in St. Francis, Wisconsin, they just find a kind of a house of horrors. They find child pornography. They find devices or implements that appear to be used for sadism, for BDSM or torture. They find all kinds of information about different missing boys. They find like pictures, posters, and
torture devices and
torture devices. They find
books on cannibalism.
Yeah, they find books on cannibalism and torture and medieval methods of torture and such. Just a cornucopia of depravity in this guy's house. But outside in the backyard, there's like ground that's been disturbed, suggesting that perhaps there was somebody trying to dig a hole at some point, and the police were not able to find any evidence that there were bodies there or anything like that. But they found in addition to all of this other weird stuff in his house, they found that some of these missing boys cases, he had actually approached the families in these cases. Case called of Jacob Wetterling, who disappeared in Minneapolis, I believe, around there.
Right,
and he had actually appeared at the house and told Jacob Wetterling's mother that he was a psychic and that he could help her find her son and everything. And she remembered that he was a very he was a very nice man, a very polite man, and everything like that. But she had no idea, of course, that he might have had an ulterior motive here. Now, how did the whole case come out? Why did the police find all of this stuff? The child pornography, the torture devices, they found it because he had been talking to his psychiatrist, a woman named, I believe her name was Victoria Fetter. I might be wrong on that. She had his psychiatrist said that he had told her that in 1959 around, he was abducted from his parents. He was a child at the time. He was abducted from the Racine City Zoo, and he was taken in a van and forced to murder another child, a 14-year-old boy, I believe he said. And he said that these men then took him back to another location and dropped him off. But this was never really explained who these men were, how any of this happened. And, Racine County, when you look at Racine, Wisconsin, how something like that could happen there, there's an underbelly to Racine, Wisconsin. And I've been looking at Racine, Wisconsin for quite a while now from that perspective, that something really, sick has been going on there in terms of corruption. Racine County was one of the areas in Wisconsin that banned hand counts in terms of elections. They wouldn't allow hand counts. They wouldn't allow paper ballots or hand counts. You had to vote by the machine. And there were a group of volunteers who tried to test the machine count against the hand count. They did a test hand count, and they found serious discrepancies between their test hand count and the machine count. And they brought this to the county board, and the county board told them, no, we voted on it. We're not doing hand counts. We're just doing machine counts. We voted on it. Nope, we're not allowing hand counts. Which to me, when I saw that video of that exchange, the county board supervisor threatens to kick the lady out if she keeps asking about doing hand counts. That told me that there's a serious problem with corruption at the county government level in Racine. And what I found out later is that there's a large history of child pornography type busts in Racine. People being arrested with large caches of this type of material. And in fact, the mayor of Racine was arrested in a sex sting trying to meet a child for sex. And they found that type of child exploitation material is what it should really be called. They found that all over his computer. And he was a sitting mayor at the time. He was in office when he was arrested for this. And so when Vernon Seitz says that he was at the Racine County Zoo and got abducted by three guys who drive up in a van, feel comfortable enough just snatching up a child off the streets, driving him to an undisclosed location, and forcing him to shoot another boy, it's a fantastical kind of story. It's difficult to believe, but when you see the type of crap that's been going on in Racine County for years and years and years, it becomes more and more plausible to me that something like that could have happened. That place could be much like Manitowoc, could be multiple layers of just corruption, just muck, that's been going on. And And what I also should have said as well is that Vernon Seitz and his House of Horrors was within walking distance of Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment, and he lived there at the same time as Jeffrey Dahmer did. And yet, supposedly they never met or anything like that. They didn't know each other. They didn't call each other. But fact is, they were within blocks of each other, and it seems like they were interested in exactly the same things.
Exactly.
And his psychiatrist, Fetter, I believe that's what her. That's bothering me now. Victoria Do you have the article there?
Well, I have a article, and I was looking for it, and I couldn't see. I'm probably looking at a completely different article than what you read.
I just
okay. Yeah, Victoria Fetter.
Okay, yeah, I looked into her because I found some of the comments that she had made in that article to be very strange. You know, she seems to justify some of Seitz's behavior in terms of these sexualized paintings that he was making of children. She seemed to justify that as some kind of a healthy outlet for whatever his issues were, which I thought was kind of a strange thing. You'd think you'd be discouraging this type of behavior, but I mean, who knows that? But she is Victoria Fetter. I looked into her history as a psychiatrist, and I found that she had a judgment against her for disclosing the personal information of a client to the client's family. If you look up profiles of Victoria Fetter, there's just all kinds of trash reviews of, this is the worst psychiatrist I've ever been to and such, so yeah, this is like, and I found out, so I thought, let's see if, I thought it was a little bit weird. This is what initially drew my attention to Fetter, was I thought it was a little bit weird that he tells her this story about being abducted at the county zoo or the city zoo and being taken by these three men, tells her this story, and then she tells the police, but then right afterward he drops dead at like the age of 60 or something. But it's like, I thought it was like, if let's say he wanted to say some things that they didn't want to come out, who would have known that he was ready to talk, that he was ready to come forward and tell his truth, other than Victoria Fetter? And it made me wonder, maybe telling her this stuff and telling her that he intended to come forward with it and go on record with the police, maybe that was his fatal mistake. Maybe she was right. And so I thought to punch in her office, her private practice, and see how close is she to Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment. And it turns out she's even closer than he was. She's like 5 minutes away or something. So and she operated there at the same time, so this is a little circle of quite the disturbing little circle of individuals in Milwaukee.
Well, I mean, sex trafficking, and I talked about in one of my other videos that the numbers don't say that Wisconsin is high on the list as far as human trafficking, drugs, things of that nature, but virtually all the states surrounding it is really high. Now, Michigan's across the pond, I understand that, but they're number 2 in almost all of those categories. That shocked me because, I figured you would have places like California, Nevada, just because of the sheer, numbers and population, but per capita, Wisconsin is number 2 in human trafficking and in drugs. And I think they're 5th in violent crime. I mean, so, and then if you look at Indiana, Illinois, all surrounding Minnesota, I don't think so that bad. I think they was actually pretty good. I think they're real close to Wisconsin, probably directly next to them. But I'm not looking at a map, but they're kind of at the epicenter of human trafficking. So, I mean, that wouldn't surprise me.
It's quite the hotbed, and Milwaukee itself is a huge hub. But I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, you wasn't interrupting, but yeah. So I'm looking at the map now. So yeah, when I was doing research on this, Wisconsin was 21st in human trafficking. So that's not good. It's in the top half of the country, but it didn't stand out. But when I started, I said, okay, well, let me look at the states surrounding it. And then Michigan was number 2 in human trafficking. Illinois was, I want to say, 5th. Indiana was high on the list. I mean, so all surround, every state surrounding Wisconsin is like a hotbed for human trafficking and violent crime and etc.
And it shows through in some of the individual cities and counties of Wisconsin that have been described as having a kind of particular concentration of this type of activity of human trafficking, of sex slavery. And I can say that in Manitowoc County in particular, I have noticed a number of individuals arrested with large caches of child pornography. and to the point where, given its relatively small size, it made me wonder, is a lot of the production happening locally in Manitowoc? And in some of the cases, that's demonstrably the truth. There was a case in, I believe, 1997 of a guy named Roger Vanderlot, who was arrested after it was found that he had actually been luring local girls in Manitowoc to his house, where he was photographing them, and exploiting them, basically producing exploitation, abuse imagery. And this guy called himself the cameraman. The whole thing came out when the mother of one of these girls, who were very young, said that they found a letter or something that was addressed to her daughter, and it was addressed the cameraman. And she started looking into who this was, because he was giving her, lingerie and stuff, and she ultimately went to Roger Vanderlot, who was an outdoors columnist. He actually was a columnist and operated a radio show in Manitowoc County. And he still is an outdoors columnist. This guy's still operating now because he's out of jail now. But he had some degree of prominence. He has a website where he offers people hunting courses and stuff. But he was producing, it seems like, a large amount of this type of exploitation material locally inside Manitowoc County. And his father, interestingly enough, was a Manitowoc sheriff's deputy. And he was also a veteran of some kind of Army intelligence unit, which kind of brings me back to Jean Couchet and some of these other guys who were involved with the Spook Corps before they became involved with the sheriff's office and stuff. But the involved with the secret services and such, which you often see in these investigations as well. I mean, the famous case of the Finders in Washington, D.C. and Florida, where they arrested, they arrested these two guys in suits who were with these 6 children who were starving, covered in dirt and filth, and they were kept in a van that was filled with, smelled like feces and stuff. And they when they arrested these 2 suited guys in Tallahassee, Florida, they brought them in for questioning, and they just produced out of their pockets these cards, pre-made cards that said, "I know my rights. I will only speak to an attorney." And they traced the van that these guys were working with in Tallahassee. They traced the van to a warehouse in D.C., and inside that warehouse, they found all these photographs of naked children surrounded by adults wearing robes. They found a photo reel showing children dismembering a goat, or watching the adults dismember the goat, and then they were handed the sexual organs of the goat, which I don't exactly know what the purposes of something like that would be, except to traumatize children. I mean,
yeah, well, I mean, you've mentioned this before, and to somebody that, well, I'm just going to say it. Some people, they'll probably roll their eyes or think it's crazy, but you shouldn't. But because regardless of your beliefs, there are people. I mean, I'm sure people have heard about the satanic cults, and they put up these statues, and they do all this and that, and they fight for their religious beliefs and all this in different counties. But I mean, you have cults. I mean, that's a fact. That's not a conspiracy theory. And you have satanic groups, and you have rituals. You have tons of different groups across America. I mean, human trafficking and sex trafficking and child pornography, all of these things are not solely based in Wisconsin or the North. It's scattered throughout the world.
It's a system.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you can look, for instance, just think about Jeffrey Epstein and the potential high profile people that could have been involved with what was going on with him.
Hundreds of names we're hearing, hundreds of names in the sealed court files, but go on.
Exactly. So if you think, if you say, well, hold on a second, if these high profile people could do this, I mean, you don't think lower people with lower social statuses can be engaged in this stuff? I mean, absolutely. So, I mean, you have networks of human trafficking, just like you have networks of drug trafficking. I mean, this isn't some far-fetched theory. And I'll tell you another problem, a growing problem, I believe, and I think this is a newer issue in our country, and I'm sure it pertains to Wisconsin as well. But teachers today, men and But mostly, I know down here, it's mostly women teachers are sleeping with their students. I mean, we're talking sixth,
Yes.
seventh, eighth grade, high school students. I mean, it used to be that, to my knowledge, that was typically a man's uh, deal where he, if something like that happened, typically you'd automatically assume, okay, it was an older man messing with this young girl. But I mean, now you have women that's coming out and being involved in these types of things. And I don't know if you remember, but when I mentioned to you last time about the SWAT, the leader of the SWAT team over here in the county I live in,
That was interesting. Yeah.
he was even more interesting is he was married to a school teacher, and she would use her platform in a sense to lure their victims.
Wow.
So you have
wow.
you have the leader of the SWAT team and a teacher, two trusted people in the community that is abusing children. And I don't want to get too descriptive on here, but you're not going to believe this next part. I'll just go ahead and say, I'll go ahead and beat around the bush, so to speak. I'll put it to you this way. To go even further than to abuse these kids. Now, this isn't speculation. This is fact. I'm sure any of y'all can get on Google and Google Livingston Parish, SWAT member, whatever, blah, blah, blah. They would commit certain sex acts and put, let's just call it fluids, in, say, cupcakes, and then bring those cupcakes to school and feed them to the kids. Now that's 100% fact.
Wow. I mean, yeah, I mean, I shouldn't be surprised because I have heard of that in another case where at first they implicated one teacher in doing that, had put fluids, as you say, and it fed it to a number of the students in the classroom.
You know what I'm saying, Thomas? Like, it's like the problem isn't getting better. It's actually getting worse. Like, I'm not sure if this is a mental illness. I don't know what it is.
Well, I think for some people, and I think that this is one of the reasons why we see with Epstein and with the Franklin scandal and with the finders and with some of what's going on in Wisconsin, we see people who are protected, who are in this kind of protected class, individuals who are in government, who are in who represent private wealthy interests, doing these types of things and seemingly doing so with impunity. And I think it's worth contemplating that for some people, for some psychopathic type personalities, you might reach a point where you have all of the money and all of the kind of social clout. You have all of, pretty much all of the generally the kind of things that people try to achieve. And what left is there but power? What left is there but and not simply power, but constantly moving to the next level of adverse behavior or abnormal behavior, or just taboo behavior. You have some people who will break the taboos and do things that are terrible just for the sake of committing that type of evil. It's to them, it's freeing, and that's actually the philosophy at the heart of many of these kind of satanic groups or quasi-satanic groups. First of all, when we talk about satanic groups, because that definitely does play into this type of thing, we see these groups like the Satanic Temple and the Church of Satan. These are atheistic, Satanist groups. They'll tell you that they don't actually believe in the devil or demons or any of these types of things. They don't actually believe in it. That for them, Satan is more of or the devil is more of a symbol of their carnal desires, of their kind of their cutthroat kind of mentality that's at the root of their thinking. And in Satanism, they see that as them embracing that mentality and embracing that mindset. And,
hey, Tom, I just want to interrupt you because it just hit me, and I don't want to forget this because, and this isn't to sound politically correct because I'm not a politically correct person, but I want to, as much as possible, I want to state fact. And when I said, now, I don't like satanic groups. I don't agree with anything of their religion or anything like that. But I think it's very important to bring up if we're having this conversation that it's not just them. Okay?
Certainly not, no.
The Catholic Church. There was a church right over here in Ponchatoula, close by where I live, that years ago came out. It was a Christian church. I think it was called Hosanna Church or something. They they had, I mean, they had some kind of satanic thing going on within the church. It was like a cult. And when they all got arrested, it was like 20 of them that got arrested. They were abusing kids and stuff. I mean, I'd have to pull up those pictures one day.
I'm familiar with that.
Look, when you start talking about people that are, if you just mention the word demon, people go just crazy. They're like, all right, that's it. End of conversation. Dude's lost their mind.
Right.
I want to show you. I'm going to send you these pictures. And if you look at these pictures of some of these people that was involved in this cult and look at their eyes, I'm telling you, it's like, it's scary.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll scare the life out of you. I mean, it's crazy crap. I don't know how to get mixed into these things, but I just wanted to be fair about it, that it's not just satanic. It's in the Catholic churches, as we all know. It's in all your not all your churches, but it's not bound to one religion or one type of person. It's rampant everywhere.
Yeah, it certainly isn't, and I think that everybody should watch The Keepers, which is also a series on Netflix, which I think is very illuminating as to the world that we live in. It's about a Catholic school, all-girls school that was under the Archdiocese of Baltimore. Of course, Baltimore is a city where the Catholic Church controls everything, in terms of it's a majority Catholic city. Most of the police are Catholic, most of the city government, and when I say most, it really is virtually all of them are aligned with the church or very devoted Catholics. But let me just get back on track. This school was under the Archdiocese of Baltimore. It was called Seton Keogh, and they had girls, were dozens and dozens of girls were abused there, sexually abused there by the same group of priests, with nothing done about it, and the number of people who knew about it was unbelievable. You even had an account of the priests would call, using the PA system of the school, would call down victims to be abused, and the teachers would look at them in the hallways and with this kind of sad look, like knowing what was going on, but the fact was they couldn't stop it. And so eventually this reaches to the information about who these guys were and what they were doing, reaches to one of the nuns that was working at the school, who worked there no longer, but who was very close to some of the students, and she starts they believe she starts trying to do something about it. And shortly thereafter, she turns up dead, murdered and bludgeoned to death. And one of the victims says that she was taken to the body by the priest who was kind of at the center of it. His name was Maskell, Maskell. And he took her to the body and let her stand over the body and said, "This is what happens to people who say bad things about people." And the case remains unsolved to this day. And there are strong indications that there was, kind of a very multi-layered cover-up involving the Baltimore police, involving people in the city government and then the mayor's office. That there's really one of the things that struck me when I was watching this series was that all of these different agencies just losing their files, losing their evidence, like this kind of very surreal pattern, like you're in this kind of a nightmare where things just aren't operating the way that they should. And the system seems to be closing ranks to protect itself. But this guy, and of course the priest who was at the center of this whole network was Maskell. He was actually the chaplain of the National Guard, as well as the Baltimore Police Department. His brother was a high-ranking Baltimore police officer, and he was on close terms with pretty much everybody in the city government. And that's often, the kind of model that you see from the Franklin scandal to the Finders to all of these other cases in Epstein. You find that there's usually a front man who's at the center of the network, who kind of is just one of these guys who has connections to everybody, and he's kind of the front man. And then behind him, you see, a lot of times you see other third parties, like intelligence agencies, like very wealthy organizations or individuals that kind of set these people up as the front man for their whole enterprise, and use what results, they use it to draw in people, blackmail them, get control over them. And then that's how you can have some of this stuff going on, some of this corruption, because who's going to speak out if it's going to mean that their whole life is going to be destroyed, their tape, so to speak. You have one of these people, for example, in Wisconsin, starts complaining about the way things are run. They can just say, we'll leak your tape. We'll leak your tape when we got you to that party and got you really, It's...
And I mentioned before that we're all human beings And when you give human beings certain powers over other human beings, you're going to have some of these situations. I mean, but when you think about all these different networks of power, and you have all these different people, let's just say in the Stephen Avery case, you have all these people in this network, this buddy system, this corruption, and you have certain players, regardless of who those players are. Okay. And and that just goes back to what many people say all the time, is that there's no, if we're sitting here telling you all of these high profile people, that's involved in these networks of illegality and messing with kids and doing all these different things, why is it so hard for people to believe that, regardless of what end of it you're on, whether you think Teresa Halbach's alive, whether you think she's dead, or whether you think Stephen Avery did it, whatever, why would it be so hard to fathom that a network in Wisconsin said, we're not letting Stephen Avery beat us, and we're definitely not paying him $36 million. It always confuses me how people can acknowledge some of these things that you're sitting here talking about.
Yeah, but it's I mean, with in particular with the occult angle, it's really difficult for people, a lot of people who don't believe in these things themselves, to wrap their minds around that, and it immediately gets their eyes rolling, like you say. They're like, come on, you're bringing the devil into this, and the devil made me do it, kind of that whole deal, but I mean, it's not about that. There are people out there who are really seriously very much believe in these things. I mean, you talked about the Hosanna Church case, which was the basis, in fact, for the True Detective series, another excellent television series.
Oh, you heard about it?
Yeah, the Hosanna Church, and that was one of the ones where all of the victims, because usually in the aftermaths of these things, when the victims are describing this kind of satanic or ceremonial trappings, rather, to the abuse that's going on, a lot of times we hear this argument, well, that stuff is so fantastical that this must be a false memory. This must be, this must be something that they created in their heads because they were traumatized and stuff like that, which is not an argument that I am inclined to agree with in many of these cases. I think in a lot of these cases, in fact, those trappings are employed by predators in order to discredit their victims in advance. You don't even have to have necessarily, because I do believe that there are some of these groups that are very underground and very dangerous, but I also believe that
I mean, they have to be underground, I mean, it ain't like they can be completely out and open, because they got people that's not gonna, they do have, thankfully, good people that's not gonna stand for it. So
yeah, but some of these groups are very out there. I mean, are very, they are officially not involved in any illegal activity. They are very much on the front lines of this false memory argument, making the argument that none of these cases of the daycares or anything like that all of them were fake, and that there was no real abuse going on. It was a giant panic, and it was a mass hallucination. That argument is often proposed by individuals in these what I would call the atheistic Satanist groups, and those are the ones that we see more out on the TV, trying to commission statues next to Capitol buildings and trying to do satanic prayers in the city councils and stuff like that. These are. I actually know I've had occasion to have various back and forths with one of the best known Satanists in the United States, a guy named Doug Mesner, who heads up the Satanic Temple. He's the guy who tries to put up all the statues and stuff. He's gotten a lot of attention. He's one of these guys who says, I don't believe in the devil. The devil represents to me, achieving power and doing what, achieving your goals by whatever means necessary. That's what the devil symbolizes to him, is what he says, and that he embraces that ideal and acts on it. So now I've had the occasion to have conversations with Doug Mesner, because he's very active on the internet, and we've kind of debated about some of these cases of the Franklin scandal and the Finders and some of these other cases. But I noticed that the guy who co-founded the Satanic Temple with him, a guy named Shane Bugbee, he's a colorful character himself. He was implicated potentially in facilitating the death of that girl from Different Strokes. What was her name? But in any case, I have a tendency to go off on tangents. But you're
fine. Go ahead.
He had Dana Plato was her name. Yeah, this guy Shane Bugbee, who co-founded the Satanic Temple with Doug Mesner, was instrumental. In the press, he was accused of being a key figure in the death of Dana Plato, basically enabling her to overdose and taping it, and then selling a tape that was billed "The Last Breaths of Dana Plato." So kind of a sleazy guy, but. Shane Bugbee was very close friends with Doug Mesner, and he had a falling out with him. And he wrote an article about the Satanic Temple, where he portrayed it as being kind of a scam, a pseudo intellectual kind of pit, that was just trying to attract kind of pretentious people and kind of take their money and stuff, waste their time. But then he said at the last lines of this article, in the conclusion, just buried at the end, he makes a very interesting comment that Doug Mesner once told him that he worked for the CIA, that he wrote reports for the CIA. He didn't give a lot of detail on that, but this is a guy who's well known to have been a friend of Doug Mesner. That much is not deniable, saying that Doug Mesner told him that he had done work for the CIA. And so it's very interesting that we would find a guy at the helm of such an organization that's attracting those types of personalities that may in fact have a connection with the intelligence community, because that raises a number of interesting possibilities. And I brought that up on Twitter. I think I posted some posted some image where it overlaid the CIA insignia with a devil's head or something, and I said Shane Bugbee says Doug Mesner works for the CIA, and Doug Mesner got on my, he basically immediately pointed it out and said this guy's an idiot, and got his whole flock, I suppose you might call them, to attack me, and said, just kind of didn't actually deny it, but just said, oh yeah, just because some fool said that I worked for the CIA, you believe it. But he didn't ever actually explicitly deny it. But I mean, Shane Bugbee was far from just some fool. He was, very, very close friend of Mesner and very much involved at the foundation of his organization. So, and this isn't the first instance at all in which you see those types of people, satanic type groups, the ones that are well known. This isn't the first time you see those connected to intelligence agencies. In fact, that's something of a common theme. The second largest group in America, satanic group, in fact, the first one that achieved tax exemption status, is the Temple of Set, which is headed by a guy named Michael Aquino, who is in fact a career Army intelligence officer. He was one of the first space intelligence officers. And, he, at the core of his group were a couple of guys from his unit that were also involved in intelligence. And you could go on and on with that. I've written before at length about the connections between the intelligence community and these types of satanic groups. And I wonder why that is. I think that there's a number of reasons for it. I think one of the reasons is that groups that are fringe in nature, that are very irregular, that are very weird, are an excellent cover for intelligence operations, because all of these things that you would think in another group, hey, that doesn't make sense, and it attracts attention. Well, if it's a bunch of Satanists or something like that, you're going to nothing about them makes sense. So that's like, they're the perfect, CIA has always loved to use fringe churches and stuff like that to kind of run their operations and stuff. They use cover employment, but there's also another more disturbing element to why they might be involved with these groups, and it's to attract certain types of personalities. Who joins a satanic group, a group that's all about achieving power and stepping over other people to get what you want? Who I would think that it would be people, and I'm not saying everybody who gravitates to those groups, so you can't even begin to speculate why somebody might be drawn to a particular philosophy, but I think many of those people would probably be kind of sociopathic or have sociopathic tendencies, or at least be people who might be kind of on the edge, want to join something to be edgy or something like that, and that too can be played with. And when you attract those types of personalities, that's basically what I'm saying, is you can get your Gregory Allens, you can get the violent types of people that you can use as a means to an end. And I think that in some ways those groups are kind of recruitment for that type of thing.
You can gather intelligence, and you can gather names on, okay, who are these people? And then, like you said, you can use that in good ways to prevent things, or you can use that, like you just said, as an end, a means to an end. So, I mean,
And on this subject, I want to read something about that I found out about Manitowoc a long time ago, and I think it's will be very interesting to some people who are interested in this angle. It's from a book called Wisconsin Folklore. It's page 33, and the chapter is called "The Significance of Manitowoc" by E.P. Wheeler. And at the bottom of the page here, we see he says that. In the Indian language, Manitowoc meant spirit land or river of bad spirits, and also devil's den. You know, and yeah, and that's so that's that is quite the interesting etymology for a city that has had such a long time association with mysterious deaths and disappearances, and a multiple layers of cover-ups and type of things that have come with them. You know, I have found out recently, in fact, that Calumet County is, 6 Indian mounds, 6 ancient prehistoric mounds exist in Calumet County, and in fact, Calumet is a word in the native language, means peace pipe or ceremonial pipe, and it's been speculated in the past. People who have watched The Shining will appreciate this, that some people have interpreted the use of that name Calumet in the movie to refer to symbolize broken peace treaties between the Europeans and the indigenous people and stuff. And a lot of these, it would amaze people how many of these burial mounds and standing stones just exist in the United States. There's well over 100,000 of these mounds, and many of them in Wisconsin, many of them, and it really is like, if you think in terms of Western mythology and occultism, that that something bad can happen to a place and that it taints the place or touches the place. If you at least think in those terms, then you could interpret the world around us as kind of an open graveyard. But yeah.
Well, but there's always, I'm a New Orleans Saints fan, and there's always been rumors that we have voodoo and witchcraft and all that down here, and we've always been told in this state that the Superdome was built on Indian burial ground, and whether or not that's true, I don't know. But for the first 40 years of the Saints' existence, I think I kind of put some stock into it. I believed it because we was absolutely horrible for 40 years, and then I don't know what happened. I don't know if they offered him a peace treaty or if the voodoo queens did some magic, but we started winning. But I mean, I've heard, there's stories like that locally. We have a bunch of voodoo and all kind of stuff down here, witchcraft, all kind of stuff that people talk about and engage in. But look, we have some people that was asking about you in the comment section, and they want to know your name, and it's right there on the screen. But
certainly I appreciate the symbolism of that as well. New Orleans, the Crescent City, and the Saints, and then certainly some interesting names and place names to go along with an Indian burial mound.
On a quick note of that, there's also the Saints have been in the news for, I'm not sure if it's a big deal or anything. I hope not. I don't think it would be, but something to do with the Catholic Church and some emails or something between the Saints organization. I haven't really researched into it because on the radio they were saying it's going to turn out not to be a big deal. I think it was like some legal advice, but hopefully we don't have some big story, coming out between the Catholic Church and the Saints organization. I mean, I don't think it is from what I've read and heard, but being that we was on this conversation about the Catholic Church, etc., I figured I'd throw that in there. But have you go ahead?
I just wondered, and this is a little bit off topic, I suppose. Are you familiar with the kind of rich history of the Kennedy assassination in your city, Jim Garrison and the like?
No, I'm not. I've watched documentaries on the Kennedy assassination, but I've never, actually did any research into it as far as other than watch a documentary or something.
There's a lot of suspicion that a lot of the planning might have occurred in New Orleans, and a lot of the preparation might have occurred in New Orleans. And in fact, there was a district attorney, Jim Garrison, who he's actually the character that he's actually the basis for the film JFK, Oliver Stone's film. But he started his own investigation because he wasn't satisfied with the Warren Commission at all. He felt it was his responsibility because of course, Lee Harvey Oswald was from New Orleans. It was his hometown, and he had spent the summer prior to the assassination. He had spent it in New Orleans. And Jim Garrison started asking the natural questions of, who did this guy talk to? Where did he go? And everything like that. And he started unraveling this web of very bizarre characters. This pilot named David Ferry, who had a rare disease where he lost all of his hair, and he painted grease eyebrows on his head and wore a kind of a wig. And this guy was, in fact, a CIA pilot. Basically, he had flown missions to Cuba, fighting Castro and stuff. And another of these characters that he was involved with, Oswald, was a guy named Clay Shaw, who was like kind of one of the top business civic leaders in the city. He headed the International Trade Mart for many years. And there's definitely been tons of books about all of these characters. It was a whole kind of intelligence network in New Orleans that was revealed, by Garrison's investigation. And these people had basically driven Oswald around from place to place and kind of told him, hand out pro-Castro leaflets here, do that, go here, talk to this person, and kind of laid him a trail of breadcrumbs for the Warren Commission to find, that helped cement the official story in people's minds. But one of the things about it that I really found interesting is that there's an occult angle there as well, in that David Ferry, Oswald's friend in New Orleans, the pilot, and in fact, Oswald's relationship with David Ferry is documented. They claim that it ended when Oswald went into the Marines after his teenage years, but it is documented that David Ferry and Lee Harvey Oswald were in the Civil Air Patrol together. Oswald was a 15-year-old cadet, and David Ferry was his squadron captain. And they denied that for a number of years too, but then eventually a photo came out showing them both at a cookout, and along with all of the testimonies from the people who were in the same unit, it's undeniable that he was in David Ferry's unit. And what the question then becomes, did as dozens of people said, did he reestablish contact with Ferry when he returned to New Orleans that summer? And yeah, certainly the witnesses are in the double digits of people who saw them together everywhere. And what I find interesting from the occult angle is that David Ferry was a bishop in a church called the American Orthodox Catholic Church. It was this very, very weird, very fringe organization that had branches in a couple of places, including New Orleans. And basically their whole deal was that they claimed that they could ordain people as bishops, and that the ordination was legitimate because they could prove that they were connected to an apostolic line of succession. That, of course, the system is that the apostles ordained, people, and that then those people ordained other people. And the legitimate chain of how an ordination works is that of all that chain of people ordaining each other, that it goes back to the apostles. That's the whole system. And they were claiming that they had that traditional, they had that legitimate apostolic succession, and they were basically turning it into a bishop mill. It was like you could basically brown nose with the right people or pay the right people, and they would give you a quote-unquote legitimate ordination. And David Ferry was one such character. He was a bishop. He had these bishop robes, and he would do these rituals in his apartment. One of Garrison's witnesses saw it, said that he had a cake, a wafer, and he would kill a chicken. He had all these chickens and mice in his house in cages, and he would take a chicken and he would kill it, and then he would pour the blood in the wafer, and he would drink some of the blood, and he would eat the wafer. Very reminiscent of the Satanism of black masses, where they use the cake and the wafer, and they put the menstrual blood and fluid and stuff in it, and then they all drink. The initiates pass it around and drink it. I mean, yeah. But David Ferry was deep into the occult, and then Clay Shaw, who was this top business leader, who Clay Shaw later was, this is an interesting bit of New Orleans history, is that Clay Shaw was the only man who was actually charged with conspiracy to murder the president. Jim Garrison actually eventually indicted him and tried him. He was acquitted. There's a wealth of material out there on it, but Clay Shaw, when they arrested him, they went into his very large and spacious home, and they found evidence of sadomasochistic type things that were going on in the home. Now, it was well known, it was kind of an open secret that Clay Shaw was gay. But Garrison did his best to keep that out of the trial, despite with a lot of people will say that Garrison was going after Shaw for that reason. That there's no real evidence of that. He actually did everything he could to keep Shaw's sexuality out of the case. But when they went into Shaw's house, they found bloody handprints on the ceiling of one of the rooms, and they found hooks attached to the ceiling where a person would be held, would be like, chained to the, fixed to the place. And they found as well, they found a long black cloak with a hood, robe, a black robe with a hood that Shaw claimed was a Mardi Gras costume, and yet they kind of said that it didn't look like it had ever been touched. So there was some question about that. They also found whips that had a what appeared to be dried blood. So Clay Shaw, by the way, lived at 1313 Dauphine Street, very appropriate. And his friend David Ferry lived at 3330 Louisiana Louisiana or Avenue Parkway. They these guys like their numbers. E. Howard Hunt, the Watergate burglar, when they, he listed his address as Witches Island. When you're involved in this type of stuff and this type of occult stuff, all that stuff means stuff to you, place names and, symbols and all that, so a lot of these guys get married to that too.
I don't like messing or dabbling in any of that, but if anybody doesn't mind dabbling in that, maybe they should contact a voodoo lady in New Orleans and get a Ken Kratz voodoo doll made.
I think, quite frankly, I think that if we busted in on some of these black masses occurring in Wisconsin, he'd be under a very large robe and hood. I don't know, we would find. I think he's part of the club, as they say, and it would be great. We should definitely get Dave Bagaka on here because he's got all kinds of.
That's why I wanted to. I was glad you wanted to maybe try a different topic today because, like I told you, next time we talk about Ricky specifically and a couple other. He said he's in Mexico right now, but he's gonna be there maybe another 3 or 4 weeks. But we're gonna get him on with us because he said he has a ton of information on the Ricky case and Stephen Avery case and stuff like that too.
Yeah, and I think that our show tonight is kind of a good lead up to talk with Dave Bagaka, because he's also went in detail about how there are rumors and long have been rumors of cult type activity in Manawoc, devil worship type activity. And I wanted to draw attention to something that Rubber Ducky just said, that they found a woman's pant leg and lubrication at the Maribel Caves, which is part of Devil's Park. And yes, the Maribel Caves Hotel, or Hotel Hell, as some locals know it, is this very creepy structure that used to be something like, I believe it used to be some kind of hotel until it burnt down to the ground. And if you look online, there's all kinds of ghost stories about it, that there used to be a coven of black magic witches that, that went there and tried to open up a portal to Satan, which would explain a lot, but this was in Manawoc, this Bagaka said that he's heard that the rumors that this type of activity was happening around there for a long time. And of course they did in fact find evidence at Maribel Caves Park. Never connected it to anything, but
well, one thing for sure, we should never run out of information to talk about on these live chats, and I'm extremely happy that you joined me today. I know you've been extremely busy, and I have too. Everybody is. But I appreciate you coming on and everything. Have you gave any more thought to when you're going to possibly create your own channel?
Imminently, I think. And as Rubber Ducky said as well, Maribel Caves Hotel was also said to be a base of operations for Al Capone, which is another interesting layer to Manawoc's history, the organized crime involved. But yes, in response to the question, I'm sorry I got distracted. I'd like to start a YouTube channel. I will start one. I just need to kind of pick up the microphone and I guess just start riffing on stuff. You know, that would probably be the best way to do it. You know, I don't, as you've seen, I don't do well with structure. I start talking about something and then I
No, well,
want to talk
look,
about 7 different things. You know.
hey, I'm absolutely glad that you're not good with structure, because I'm really the world's worst at it myself. You'll start talking about one thing and that'll make me think of something else, and so I mean, it's fine. That like I told you earlier, I like coming on here, having fun, talking about all of it, and that's I think other people enjoyed that as well. But it was really good having you on, and I appreciate everybody that tuned in, and everybody's going to watch this when soon as Thomas gets his channel created and starts. I'm pretty sure he's going to have plenty of subscribers. And if you watching this and you haven't subscribed to my channel, make sure you subscribe, like the video, share. And for today, that's going to be it. And any last words, Thomas, while I'm ending the broadcast?
All right. I mean,